What is up, guys? So this is going to be my review for Ant-Man and the Wasp, and this is going to be a spoiler-free review, so you would not find any spoilers here. If you haven't seen the movie, then you could still watch this video. So Ant-Man and the Wasp is kind of awkwardly the 20th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I say it's awkward because the big movie that everything has been building up to was right before Ant-Man and the Wasp. That was Avengers Infinity War, so it's a little awkward how that's 19, this is 20, but obviously that doesn't really matter in terms of, like, anything. I just think it's a little awkward how Ant-Man and the Wasp is 20 and Avengers Infinity War is 19, but this is the 20th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and compared to the last two movies, it's much lower stakes and kind of inconsequential. Like, it doesn't matter what happens in this movie except for, like, a certain character coming back and something that happens near the end. Everything else doesn't really matter in terms of the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that definitely worked in the last movie because it was a movie that came after Avengers Age of Ultron, and it came after, like, a huge crossover event that movie wasn't the most well-received movie. I mean, it was, everybody liked it, I'd say, but not a lot of people loved it. So back in 2015, I would say it was kind of a breath of fresh air at that point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to go from a huge crossover event that kind of tired people out on the Avengers movie for a little bit to a lower stakes Ant-Man movie that definitely worked at that time. This time, however, in 2019, it definitely does not work as well because Avengers Infinity War happened and it ended on a huge cliffhanger, and what you just want to know what happens next. So to see a kind of inessential movie come out like 2 months later kind of doesn't work in terms of that. It just feels like it's tiding you over until Captain Marvel, and then Avengers 4 is going to come out after that. But that's not really fair on this movie. I mean, the release date shouldn't really affect the review or the rating of a movie, but I would have preferred it if Ant-Man and the Wasp came out before Avengers Infinity War, so that, first of all, Avengers Infinity War would be the 20th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and there wouldn't be a really inessential movie in between Infinity War and Avengers 4 and Captain Marvel, so just because it just feels like it tides you over. So this movie is titled Ant-Man and the Wasp, which means it focuses on the two titular characters, Ant-Man and the Wasp, as opposed to the last movie, which just focused on Ant-Man. And I think I don't really have much to say about this other than the fact that it actually definitely works in terms of action sequences. It's really interesting to see these two different power sets, just slightly different power sets, work in an action sequence and like work together. Outside of the action sequences, it definitely works as well. I think the chemistry between these two is great. I don't really have much else to say about that, about the fact that, about like the title of the movie attributing to the movie itself, so I'll just leave it there. So just like basically every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, this is an action comedy, and I'd say in both action and comedy, the movie definitely did really well. I'd say in comedy, it was a little hit and miss. Near the beginning of the movie, I would say like the first half an hour of the movie wasn't very funny. Like, all the comedy in the first half an hour of the movie was a little hit and miss. Like, whenever a joke was told and it didn't land and the theater was just quiet, it was really awkward. So the comedy in the movie, like the first half of an hour of the movie, a little hit and miss, but I would say like the last hour and a half of the movie was definitely really funny, especially with every scene with Michael Pena. Just like in the last movie, he steals the show in terms of comedy. Just like in the last movie, he had one of these narration things, and you know they would do another one of those just because the last movie everybody loved that, so they would definitely do another one of those in this movie. I would have expected them to do more than one, though. I would have hoped they'd do more than one, but either way, that one was really funny, and in general, everything with Michael Pena in this movie was hilarious. I would say the second hour and a half, or like really the second half of the movie and a little bit more, was really funny. It's just the first half an hour that was a little hit and miss. So then there's the action, and the action was mostly really great and really creative as well. Like the way they used the shrinking effect and then growing bigger and like putting that in the action, and it flowed really well, and it was great to see. It was really creative. I thought it was even more creative than the last movie in terms of like shrinking objects and then making them grow bigger, and just using the shrinking technology and not the effect in the fight scenes was great. Like I said, even better than the last movie. The Giant Man effect I thought was better in Civil War, just the way it was used, but either way, it was still really great in this movie as well. Everything about the action in this movie was really creative, really great, and that's really all I have to say about the action. It was great, creative, and the fight scenes between Ant-Man, the Wasp, and Ghost were a little bit awkward, but I wouldn't say that is, like, there was like one or two fight scenes, so that's not most of the action. Most of the action were some other things, but the fight scenes between Ant-Man and the Wasp and Ghost were definitely not as great as the rest of the fight scenes in the movie. Speaking of Ghost, Ghost is the main villain of this movie, and as for main villains, I thought first of all her costume was really cool and her powers were great. I thought the way they used her powers, except for in the fight scenes between Ghost and Ant-Man and the Wasp, were great. Like the phasing effect was really cool, but her backstory and her motivations and really the acting and the personality didn't make for the greatest villain in terms of this movie. Like, which is weird because the last 2 years, the MCU has been hitting out the really great main villains in their movies. Like there was Thanos, Killmonger, Vulture, and also Hela and Ego, and those are some of the best main villains in the MCU. So to go from that to Ghost is kind of a downgrade, but I mean you can't expect every movie to have a great main villain. Although the MCU is definitely making strides to make their movies have better villains. This movie, however, the main villain is, I wouldn't say she was generic, because her power set and her costume and her motivation in general were not very generic, but I would say the acting wasn't very great and the personality wasn't very creative or anything. It wasn't very different. So maybe like that personality and the acting was pretty generic, but I did like her costume. I did like her powers, and in general she was, I would say, an okay villain. Not bad, but definitely not great like the last 5 villains from the MCU. So the plot of this movie is a little bit all over the place, and I think the reason for that is just going from Avengers Infinity War to this kind of inessential movie is a little unsatisfying, especially how low stakes this movie is. Really the only goal of this movie is to get Janet Van Dyne back out of the quantum realm. It's really the only purpose of this movie. That's what Ant-Man, that's what Hope, Hank, and Scott were trying to do in this movie. That was the main plot of this movie, and then there's just like the lab being stolen and being taken back again. That's not really a spoiler, that's just the plot of the movie, and the plot of the movie was definitely a little simple, maybe a little too simple. I mean, it was just a bunch of people trying to get this one thing back and forth, and then one of the other characters goes into the quantum realm to get one of the other characters, and that's really a really simple and, like I said, inessential plot for this movie, which is very unsatisfying after Avengers Infinity War. And I said that wouldn't really affect the score of this movie, but I would probably go back on that because it really definitely affects how much I like this movie in terms of it coming out right after Avengers Infinity War. It does tie into Avengers Infinity War a little bit in the end credit scene, so not even in the movie, although the end credit scene is kind of the mid credit scene is kind of the ending of the movie. But other than that, the movie is so inessential that it doesn't really feel like a must watch movie, unlike the last 5 movies from the MCU, or really the last, ever since Iron Man 3. I think every movie after Iron Man 3, maybe every movie after Thor: The Dark World, was very essential for the universe. And maybe not Ant-Man, but I would say, I mean, Ant-Man introduced both Ant-Man and the Wasp, so that is essential as well. This movie didn't really introduce anyone, didn't really add anything to the larger MCU, and that is even worse. Like, it's even worse for the universe when it comes right after Avengers Infinity War, so that definitely will affect the plot, or the rating of this movie, because it's just so unsatisfying, and it's the first inessential movie since like Iron Man 3, which that was a whole 5 years ago. But the plot is a little bit too simple. It doesn't really add anything to the universe, so that is definitely not a huge plus on this movie. The first Ant-Man movie introduced the quantum realm, which was one of the most interesting parts of the movie, or one of the most interesting things that movie introduced into the universe, and I think that was expanded upon on Doctor Strange, in the Doctor Strange movie. But I was definitely expecting them to expand on that. In this movie, they didn't really expand on the quantum realm. They didn't really add anything to the quantum realm, but they did. I mean, I guess they did add a couple things to the quantum realm in terms of Janet Van Dyne and what happened with her. I'm not going to say what happens. I'm not going to say how that affects the quantum realm, but I feel like the quantum realm, the way they use the quantum realm in this movie could have been done a little bit more, but what was given to us was pretty cool as well. I would have loved to see a little bit more of the quantum realm in this movie. Like, I would have loved to see it more intertwined into the plot, with more scenes from the actual main storyline happening in the quantum realm instead of the real world, or the bigger world, basically the normal world. But either way, the quantum realm was a really interesting thing to see in this movie, more so than the last movie. It was just explored a little bit more in this movie, so that was definitely cool to see. I just would have loved to see a little bit more from the quantum realm. So I know it sounds like I am hating on this movie, and I definitely do not hate this movie. In fact, I don't think I hate anything about this movie. I would say I kind of dislike a couple things about this movie. For instance, the underuse of the quantum realm, the plot being a little inessential, and the main villain not being the greatest main villain. But there are a lot of things that I do like about this movie, like, speaking of the main villain, her power set and her costume were definitely really interesting. The action in general, the comedy for the last hour and a half, all really great. It's just that the release date, the fact that it came out after Infinity War and how unessential it is, definitely leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But if you just detach this movie from the rest of the MCU, like have it a standalone movie not connected to the rest of the MCU, it's definitely a really enjoyable watch. And if you just don't consider the fact that Infinity War came out right before it and it's very inessential to the MCU, it's definitely a really great movie. It's funny, the action is great, it's exciting at times, so I would say I would like this movie a little bit more than this review would say I would, just considering that the fact that it came out right after Infinity War leaves a bad taste in your mouth because of how unessential it is. Just by itself, though, it's definitely a really great movie. So with that in mind, I will give Ant-Man and the Wasp an 8.1 out of 10. A lot of things are great in the movie, a lot of other things are hit and miss, and the release date definitely does not help it. The fact that it comes out after Infinity War definitely does not help the score, but an 8.1 out of 10 is definitely a respectable score. So let me know what you thought about Ant-Man and the Wasp in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.